Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. This week we are back on home turf and we've got a suitcase absolutely stuffed with summer gardening know-how. Here's what's coming up. Clarence shows us how to grow an iconic Aussie.
An incredibly beautiful blood red desert flower. Some of the mob in corner call Nuringa.
I'm meeting a couple who have literally travelled the world to find each other and are growing a beautiful, productive and delicious life here in central Victoria.
Hannah has some great tips for growing shelter and protection from wind in your garden.
And I'm going to show you an unexpected source of garden greens, tree leaves.
Compost. For us gardeners, it's the life of our garden party. It keeps soil and everything in it vibrant and healthy. On top of that, it draws down carbon and it keeps valuable food scraps out of landfill. Making your own compost can be daunting though. It takes a bit of technique to get everything humming along nicely. And one of the key things is regularly turning your compost pile. Turning your compost forces fresh air into the pile. And what that does is basically supercharge the whole composting process. It allows air to get between the particles. It activates the microbes, but it prevents everything, all of the food scraps from compacting, forcing the air out and turning it into an anaerobic, gluggy mess. There's different ways you can get air into your piles. Some systems have an air tube which does it sort of ongoing. Most people use a fork or a compost corkscrew turner like this one. Both of those methods require a bit of grunt. If that's not for you, I've got an alternative worth considering. Now this contraption here is what you call a compost spinner. Basically you put all your materials in there and it spins on this axle. It's a bit like when you go to the bingo, all the numbers are in there, then they spin it, clickety-click, double six, you're a winner. And actually with this you are a winner because it takes the hard work out of turning the compost. There's a couple of other advantages as well. It's off the ground so it's harder for vermin to get in there. And when it comes to unloading, you can bring your wheelbarrow right up, open this up, and away you go. Now, of course, you can buy one of these, but I reckon with a little bit of creativity, you can design and build one of these to suit your own garden. And in the process, you'll actually be putting back to work a whole lot of repurposed materials. Come on, let's give it a go. The compost spinner I have in mind will need plenty of sturdy timber, galvanised or stainless steel screws, a length of galvanised pipe, and a big plastic barrel. Barrels like these are really easy to find. Generally, you'll see lots of them and they're blue in colour. This is exactly the same. They're all about 220 litres. A lot of them have a clamp lid, some of them just have holes. I've gone with this type because it's a screw top, and that's really good because it enables you to get all your materials in, but then it seals nicely, so when you spin it, it doesn't dribble everywhere. Oh, now, that's Kalamata olives, so that means that this has been transporting food, and that's the question you've got to ask. Make sure you know what was in it. This symbol here is food safe, and when I smell that, it reminds me of my grandparents. My spinner needs a good sturdy frame that starts with 2 pairs of legs. These will support the axle about 1 metre up. to give your barrel plenty of room to spin. Once your timber is cut to length, drill a hole through the top with a spade bit. This is for the axle to spin in. Then fix the legs together with galvanised screws. Now to the barrel. We want it to spin easily, even when it's chock-a-block full of compost. So to do that, we need to find the central axis, because that's where our axle will sit and then it will rotate around it. Use a piece of timber on top for reference and measure a point halfway up the barrel. And I'm using my old nylon tape measure because I can wrap it all the way around the barrel to accurately measure the circumference. So that's a circumference around the barrel of 1780 millimetres. If I divide that by 2, that gives me 890 to mark for the exact opposite side of the barrel for the axle to come out. Using those marks, drill holes in the barrel with your spade bit. Next, the axle. It needs to be a good snug fit, so don't be surprised if it takes a little effort to get it in. That way the barrel won't wobble, nor will it leak any liquid. That's a really nice snug fit, so it's not going to wobble. I'm using the wheelbarrow as my extra set of hands so that I can build the spinner. And my next step is to put these spacers on, and basically they'll stop the barrel from moving across the axle once the 2 support posts fill up that space. The frame is an easy fit around the axle, which means it shouldn't have trouble spinning. So that's standing on its own now, and it will spin. But there's a couple more steps, important parts of the process, which is the bracing. To keep the frame held firmly in place, I've gone for a bit of cross bracing. Should be as safe as houses. Well, there you have it, your own homemade spinning compost bin. I'm really happy with it. It's sturdy and it's ready to make compost. From time to time, give the timber a little bit of a rub down with some linseed oil. Place it in the shade. That way your compost bin won't get too hot and dry out. And then this end, it's open. There's no brace across here, so you can wheel your wheelbarrow right up and tip your compost in. I don't think there's anything else much to say other than I reckon it's a compost revolution.
Will mulch kill weeds? Well, if you've got bare ground and you put a good layer of mulch down, it will suppress weed seed germination. If you've got a crop of tiny annual weeds, like winter grass, and you put mulch down, it will probably kill them. But if you've got running weeds, like cooch, kikuyu or buffalo, you need a different approach. Sheet mulching works really well. That's when we mow those weeds down to the ground, we feed them with organic fertiliser, water them, and then cover them with cardboard or layers of newspaper. Finally, we put mulch on top, and it will kill those hard-to-kill weeds.
Should you clean your bird bath? Yes, you definitely should, both for the birds and yourself. Birds prefer to bathe in clean, fresh water. And if the water becomes stagnant, well, you're likely to attract mosquitoes, which are a real nuisance. If the inside of the bird bath gets quite dirty, then think about cleaning it with a mild vinegar solution. Never use detergents because they can damage the natural coating on bird feathers.
Can I grow cacti and succulents indoors? Technically, yes, but you need to make sure you give them a spot with plenty of sunlight for most of the day. Otherwise, they start to stretch out, getting long and leggy, reaching out for the sun. The most ideal position for succulents and cacti is outdoors, where they have access to full sun. And then you can bring them inside for a holiday when you want to enjoy them.
How do
do you tell if a plant is really dead? Very often plants die back and yet their root system is still living. Well, just leave them be and they'll come up again, hopefully with a bit of tender, loving care. In this case, this cactus, I think, has been overwatered and it's just shriveled up, and I don't think there's anything underneath that will come up again. It really is cactus. This one is looking very miserable. It's actually a Camellia sinensis, the tea plant, and I think it's just got a little bit too hot. Morning sun is probably best, and it looks like the potting mix has dried out a little bit, so make sure that you keep it moist and put it in a morning sun spot. And because it's looking a little bit tacky, I would tend to give it a little bit of a haircut down to where you see a little bit of new growth. See that new leaf there? At least there's a sign of new growth, so let's chop that back. They will likely shoot again. Keep the moisture up to them, and in fact, if you just pull your fingernail down, you can see that it is green underneath. And you'll find that a plant really does want to live.
There are plenty of Aboriginal dreaming stories that tell the tale of so many of our much-loved native flowers. Now, the floral emblem of South Australia is no exception. An incredibly beautiful blood-red desert flower, some of the mob and corner call Nuringa. We also know this plant as the blood flower or Sturt's desert pea, Swainsona formosa, after the English botanist Swainson and the explorer Sturt, who were the first white fellas to come across it. I love desert plants, and particularly this one. It's a low-growing, almost prostrate annual with lovely grey-green foliage and bright scarlet leaf-like flowers. The bulbous black centre is known as the boss. They're notoriously difficult to grow due to their arid desert adaptations. So today I'm going to show you how to successfully cultivate these beauties in a pot. For this, I'm going to use an unglazed terracotta pot because the dry terracotta clay will wick away any excess moisture. Now you need one at least 50 centimetres deep because the plant has a deep taproot. We're going to get a bit of polypipe and we're going to put that into our pot because after the seed germinate and the plant establishes itself, those taproots are going to take water from below. So we're watering from the bottom up rather than the top down. Now because the desert pea prefers gritty, free-draining soil, we're going to go with a mix of half coarse river sand, quarter soil and a quarter gravel, or 2 sand, 1 soil, 1 gravel. Very simple mix. Get it nice and mixed. You don't be too pedantic about it. There we go. So once you're happy with the level of mix in the pot, then we're going to add about 1 centimetre or 10 mil of coarse river sand to mimic those desert conditions and sow our seeds directly into the sand. And you can get them from your local nursery or buy them online. But because they've adapted to those harsh desert conditions, they have a hard coating so that they can lie dormant in the soil for those right conditions to come, sometimes decades. So you need to soak them overnight. But once you soak them, they will swell and they're ready for germination. Sow them at a depth of about 5 mil. They will germinate in 4 to 10 days, all things considered. Keep the soil / sand nice and moist, and there you have it. Nuringa, Sturt's desert pea. Once they've sprouted, they need no supplementary watering, so keep them protected from rain. And remember, never water the foliage. You may only need to replenish the water once a month, or less in humid conditions. Now your plant should produce beautiful blood red flowers in about 4 months. When the flower stalks reach 10 centimetres, fertilise once with slow release fertiliser, and sit back and watch the show.
One of the best things about gardening is everyone can be a part of it. And the great gardens always benefit from collaboration. Millie's visiting a couple who've grown an abundant garden and life working together.
I'm in Chewton in central Victoria, and this is the garden of two people who are affectionately known locally as the Garden Gnomes. They're Dwang and Rob, and together they've transformed this block to create a flavour-filled garden.
So people come here and they marvel at how well the vegetables doing. Well, it's because I have a compost maker here. He makes my soil.
He makes my soil. Is there any more romantic concept in a gardener's life?
Blunt term. I'll refrain.
I do the planting and Rob does all the infrastructure for me. Builds all the boxes. Yeah.
It's like a match made in heaven to do that. Like, you love doing these sorts of projects, I think. You're really just using your own skills to do the different things in the garden.
Yeah, and Dumpon decides all the things that she needs for the cooking. And she's a great cook, so, you know, why wouldn't I?
Work hard, get fed well.
Indeed, and live healthy life.
Yeah.
I love this. Like, I feel wealthy looking at this garden bed.
This is called the basil run. So every year I grow a lot of basil.
Right near the house too, so you can get great access to it.
Yes. This one is what they call Thai basil. And I don't like it because the leaves are so small. It's hard to pick. But I get what is called a Siam Queen.
And then purple basil, beautiful.
Basil, yes. And Italian basil.
Yes.
And then this is my price of the basil. It's holy basil. I grew up with Tulsi, and according to my mother, it cures everything.
Everything.
So yeah, everything. So whatever I had as a child, she would just go and get a bunch of Tulsi, put it in the food, and then I feel better. It has its unique flavor, aroma that it's different from basil. Yeah.
And you just pick it like you would basil, taking those tips out all the time.
Yes.
And only in summer? Is it only
Only in summer.
Okay.
Yeah. Now in Thailand they grow as perennials.
Yes.
But not here.
I imagine that fragrance just reminds you of being
home. Yes. Yeah. It's a home thing.
And so, what would you use this for?
I use this in stir fry. And after the cooking is done, you put it in when the heat is turned off.
Right at the end?
Yes.
In an area like this that is skeletal fertile soil, the native vegetation is really adapted to that. But our vegetables,
Vegetables aren't,
Yeah.
And so it gives you a certain satisfaction in being able to make a growing material that you've made yourself. A bit like building something, really, I suppose. 3 basic ingredients is some cow manure, some straw and leaves. And then I can add to that kitchen scraps. And then I layer it. That's the secret, I think. Layer it and keep turning it. And because it's on a concrete floor, I have to add worms.
Right, because no one can find their way in.
Yeah.
It's not just the raised garden beds that benefit from Rob's rich soil. The potted edibles at the front entrance are also thriving. I love this little courtyard and how you're using it to grow all of these plants that I would think wouldn't really survive a winter very easily up here.
It's been a challenge because I've lost a few, but I had to make them thrive because I need them for my cooking. I believe in using things that are local, so if I'm going to do that, I have to make it from my front door so I can come out from the kitchen. And makrut is something I use almost every day.
It's absolutely thriving, that plant. It's so healthy and so full of leaves, which is what you use?
I also use the fruit and the rind. Yeah.
And that is a favourite crop?
Yeah, that is my kangkung, water spinach.
Oh, yum.
Yes. And so I double pot it so that the bottom pot will always have water.
Growing food has been part of Dwang's life since early childhood. Born in a small village called Nan in northern Thailand, she was the 10th of 11 children. Everyone had a role in supporting the family, and Duang's was in the garden.
So when I was maybe 3 or 4, my mother taught me how to grow vegetable. And by the time I was 5, I was to take the vegetable that I grow to go to the market. I would leave home at about 5:30 in the morning, sell vegetable from 6 to about 7:30, come back home, take a shower, get dressed and go to school.
That's sort of a history where you're all working from such a young age. It's such a different way of being a child. Some people might take that and feel like it was a chore, but you took it into your heart and you were proud of it.
I am, and the older I get, the more, I'm quivering. The more I'm grateful that I know how to do so many things because I learned at such an early age. And I guess because I learned it that way and not through books, I'm not afraid to try something that maybe wouldn't work, and I would learn from that mistake. So I think it just got into my blood. So ever since then, I've always had to have my own vegetable.
Life saw Duang leave Thailand to explore the world, and an opportunity in Australia introduced her to Rob.
So when I was in my early 20s, I got a scholarship to come and study nursing in Adelaide, and I was a Rotary scholar. And so I had to go to dances and balls and all these things in the 60s. And Rob was my partner. He took me to dances. Then we parted ways in 1971 and didn't see each other again, nor communicated until 1997.
So 2 decades passed before Duang returned to Australia, and incredibly, their paths crossed again.
And there, in the arbor of this place, was Rob. And I could not take a step. I just thought, oh my God, the earth has opened up and I was going to fall right in.
Wow. That's so good. Did you ever imagine that you would end up here together?
No.
Creating this beautiful garden and this life together?
No, not in a million years. Yeah.
This productive partnership is all about great food, not only for themselves, but also the cooking classes that Duang runs. So who could resist the offer of a private lesson and lunch? Oh, that just looks so good already. And all it is
smells
garlic
good,
and
doesn't it?
it's amazing. So what are we making?
I'm making a stir-fry eggplant
Yes.
and holy basil over salt and pepper tofu.
So that's the holy
Very
basil
simple.
we picked? Nice.
And the stir-fry sauce is 1/3 soybean paste, 1/3 soy sauce, and 1/3 stir-fry sauce.
what is
yeah.
stir-fry sauce?
It's very similar to oyster sauce. And when the garlic is brown,
Yes.
we put that in.
So this goes in next, almost
Yes.
like a curry paste. You
Yes.
have to cook it a little
Yes.
bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And so I just let this caramelize a bit until it's really, really hot, bordering on
Do you need
burn.
this? Oh, all in together.
Yes.
So it's completely covered in that sauce and the garlic now.
Yes.
Hello. Oh,
There you go.
you've done this before. Not too hot. How do you know when this is cooked well enough?
When it's nice and soft.
Right, so
yeah.
you really cook it completely through.
Yes.
All right, time for the tulsi. So heat goes off when the leaves go in.
Yes.
It's such a hearty meal.
Yeah. There's nothing like eating the vegetable you grow, even if it's just a few basil. I feel that despite everything that I've done, the thing that I do best is food, growing food and cooking food. And so I really feel like I have come full circle.
So you two eat like this every day?
I try to make healthy food, and I try to make food from the garden.
I can't wait to try. Oh, that's delicious. It's got a lovely aniseedy flavour, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for a beautiful day, a beautiful meal, and a beautiful story, your life together.
It's so good to finally meet you.
When you're creating a hedge or windbreak, you can end up using lots of plants. Now, you can buy seedlings or you can propagate them for next to nothing using the existing shrubs that are already growing. With woody natives like this sticky hotbush, it's dead easy, and every cutting is also a clone of the parent that it's been taken from, so you can be sure that when it grows up, it'll match all the others in the row exactly. Get a cutting from a healthy plant, and you're looking for the semi-hardwood, which is the wood between the older, more mature growth and the fresh, floppy growth. The semi-hardwood is good to use during the warmer months. I like to make my cuttings around 15 centimetres long, and I then just take off the majority of the leaf, making sure I leave just a little bit at the very top so the plant can photosynthesise. Now, if you have a really big leaf, you might want to actually cut it in half so it doesn't take too much energy from the plant. Use a well-balanced potting mix, and rather than pushing the cuttings in, use a dipper to prevent them from getting damaged. To pot up, I like to dip the ends of the cuttings into honey. This is optional, but it acts as a natural rooting hormone. Keep in a warm, brightly lit spot and plant out when the roots are established. And that's pretty much all there is to it, and why propagation is an easy, affordable way to create lots of plants for your next hedge or windbreak.
Rhubarb is such a versatile vegetable, yet it's so underrated. I'm going to show you how to make a simple sparkling rhubarb drink which is delicious, and to do so I need to harvest 6 to 8 large stems and cut the leaves off. To make the sparkling rhubarb drink, I've already dissolved 875 grams of sugar in 1 litre of boiling water. Now I'm going to add 3.5 more litres of cold water, 200 mils of white vinegar, mix it all together, and then add 875 grams of rhubarb. Now this has been washed and diced roughly, and 1 lemon which has been diced. Now this needs to be covered by a tea towel and left for 2 days at room temperature. At the end of 2 days, you strain off the liquid and store it in recycled plastic PET bottles. Now it's going to ferment over 2 weeks, so it's really important you use plastic and not glass. At the end of the 2 weeks, you refrigerate the carbonated drink and it's delightful as is. Now the colour of the end product depends a lot on the colour of the rhubarb stalks you use, so the redder they are, the better it will look. Another beautiful way to make any of your cold drinks extra special is to freeze edible flowers in ice cubes using silicone ice cube trays. Now the sorts of flowers you can use are borage flowers, heartsease or Johnny jump ups, rose petals, calendula petals, even begonia flowers. Now one trick is to put your flower in the bottom of the tray and only half fill the tray with water. That way if the flower floats to the top, you can then top up the tray and freeze again so your flowers end up in the middle of the ice cube, not on the top like they did here. Now the other trick, if you want clear ice cubes, is to use cool boiled water. And these can be added to any of your favourite drinks and they'll look stunning. These simple and refreshing homemade drinks are great for any occasion, and they'll be sure to impress your family and friends. They also make great gifts. Check out the website for the full recipe and details on how to make them. Cheers.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, Tammy gives her tips for feeding indoor plants. Josh plants the sweetest crop of all, watermelons. And we find out what an icon of the Australian plant scene does at his place. Edible leaves are veggie garden staples. You're probably thinking lettuce, silver beet, even kale. But lots of plants have edible leaves, even trees. And Jerry's got a few faves.
In my garden, I rely on over 100 edible plants to keep me well fed. And one of the staples are my garden greens. They're easy to grow, deeply nutritious, and generous in their yields. And while annual edible greens like brassicas and cabbage get a lot of publicity, there's one unexpected source of edible greens that deserve the spotlight. It's these trees. All of the edible trees in my garden are evergreen, which means they provide an abundance of useful leaves all year round. On top of that, they're low maintenance and don't have the germination, labour requirements and establishment lag time before harvest that annuals do. Let's start with something you may already have or at least be familiar with. You see, chances are, if you've got an edible garden, you may already have a tree with edible leaves that you're not taking advantage of. Pomegranates are a backyard staple, revered right around the world for their juicy tart fruit. But did you know the leaves are also edible? They're best in spring and they have a slightly tart flavour. I think they're best if they're stir-fried, and my favourite way of eating them is in a larb salad. And that tartness goes really well with the citrus in the dressing. And that's the national dish of Laos. Speaking of citrus, it's probably something that you may already have in your garden all year round, whether or not they're fruiting. What about the leaves? Young, tender leaves, chopped very finely, will impart their oils and aroma in stir-fries, curries, or even roasts. While it's slightly left of field, one tree with edible leaves that's such a great example of its kind that it's developed its own cult following, and that is this, moringa, also known as the horseradish tree. It has edible seed, which can be roasted. It has edible flowers and edible leaves, and even a tiny seedling like this, just 6 weeks old, it's already developed a fleshy root which can be used as a substitute for horseradish. But the leaves are the real reward. The young foliage and flowers are a ready source of vitamins A and C, as well as calcium and phosphorus. The leaves contain up to 38% protein. That's remarkable for any leafy green. It's fast-growing and ornamental. The leaves are delicate and fern-like. It can be grown either as a tree, 8 to 10 metres in height, or easily pruned to keep it to a smaller shrub. These immature seed pods are called drumsticks, and they're prized. They can be cooked and added to curries, and they're relished in Sri Lanka. Now, it's this multitude of uses and the malleability of the tree which makes moringa such a star in the edible garden. Now, they do need a freely draining soil, but then they are quite drought tolerant. It grows well in semi-arid zones and on poor soils, as well as high rainfall areas and fertile soils. The only limiting factor is heat. You need to be in the tropics or subtropics. Cassava is a versatile, adaptable and drought-resistant crop. It's primarily grown for its starchy roots. In fact, it's the 5th most important starch staple on Earth. But the leaves are also edible, and they're very nutritious. They have high vitamin A and protein content. But be aware, they are poisonous raw. However, cooking in boiling water for around 2 minutes will neutralise the toxin, ready for your plate, and they work wherever you'd traditionally use a classic green like silver beet or spinach. And this is Polycius guilfoylii, an evergreen tree with spreading branches, eventually reaching a height of at least 3 to 4 metres. This is widely cultivated across South Asia, Southeast Asia, into Polynesia. The large leaf varieties like this are best cooked. The small varieties, well, they can be eaten raw as a garnish. And flavour-wise, well, I just regard these as a tropical version of parsley. Like most people, I grow guavas for their fruit, but unlike most people, I prefer them green with salt and chilli. It's very refreshing. But did you know you can use the leaves to make a medicinal tea? It's great for settling a queasy stomach. It's very astringent, so I have to channel my inner Mary Poppins by adding a spoonful of honey and a little bit of lime juice to help the medicine go down. Next, there's chaya, or Mexican tree spinach. Left to its own devices, this is a fast-growing large shrub or small tree. But every spring, I prune it to 1 metre high, and that keeps it to this size, which is perfect for this space. The tree can grow to 6 metres tall, but is usually pruned to approximately 2 metres for easier harvest. It's a popular leaf vegetable in Mexican and Central American cuisines, similar to spinach. Like cassava, the leaves should be cooked before eating, and this neutralises the toxins. To be eaten safely, boil the leaves between 5 and 15 minutes and never cook them in an aluminium saucepan. And the reason for that is the toxin can react with the aluminium metal in the pan. Mexican tree spinach is a relatively easy plant to grow and care for. In my experience, it's been drought-proof, but the limit is heat. Now this is truly a tropical plant. I always struggled to grow them well in Sydney, but they thrive up here in Brisbane. Now if you do get a cold snap in winter, don't be tempted to tidy them up and remove the dead leaves. Leave the foliage on. That will act as insulation for the whole of the plant, just in case you get another cold snap. And be ready with an old lace curtain to provide some cover if a frost is forecast. These are incredibly productive and they can be harvested all year round. Now the trick I use is to remove the shoot tips so you get the best eating, and as you forage, you're pruning the plant and it keeps them nice and bushy. Leafy greens are an important part of every diet, so why not broaden your horizons? There are loads of trees out there with nutritious leaves that are low maintenance, malleable in size, that can be grown in pots. They're just waiting for you to explore their uses.
What's the best fertiliser for indoor plants? For most indoor plants, a good general fertiliser is suitable. One with a balance of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium content is ideal. Choose one with slightly higher nitrogen levels for those plants with big green leaves. If you choose liquid feeds, these would need applying often, which means a bit more of your time and money in the long run. However, the advantage is that they do give a very quick boost to the plant, rather like your morning coffee. Liquid feeds come in different varieties, but beware of fish emulsion, which can be quite smelly, especially if you have a lot of plants. An alternative is slower release feeds. Their effect on the plant is not as instant as liquid feeds, but there's potentially less mess. Plus, it's easy to use. Simply sprinkle and water in, or add when repotting. Feed and forget. Choose a method that suits you. Either will be appreciated by your plants.
When it comes to the taste of summer, there's very few flavours that can compete with these ones. The watermelon. Oh, I can taste it right now. But the question is, have you ever thought of growing your own? Well, Josh is here to show you how.
I've been growing food at home for decades now, and I've got a pretty good handle on how to raise a productive crop of many varieties of fruit and vegetables. But there's always things you haven't grown. For me, one of those, would you believe, is watermelons, and I guess that's because space has always been at a premium, so I've tended to go for more compact crops. But today, that's all going to change. Now, I'm not going to grow one of these big varieties. Instead, I'm going for some heirloom small varieties, including Sugar Baby and Golden Midget. Now, they'll grow to a size of about 3 kilos, light enough to grow up instead of out. Watermelons prefer well-drained soils, which I certainly have. But they're also a hungry and thirsty crop. So I'm going to work in some compost and blood and bone fertiliser. The drip line goes back in place and then mulch over the top. If you're gardening on heavy soil, then build up some mounds with plenty of compost and plant into those so the water can drain away. Now, I mentioned earlier that when I plant these watermelons, instead of having them grow horizontally like they're inclined to do, I want to grow them up. And I'll do that with the help of these steel mesh panels. You can find these at most hardware stores, or if you're lucky, you might pick up some offcuts of larger Rio mesh from a salvage yard. Either way, they'll last for years and can be used again and again. Stand them up across the bed to create an A-frame. Once in place, secure the top with some wire and the bottom with steel pins or stakes. I'm setting up 2 frames in this bed to maximise the vertical growing space. In addition to saving space, by growing the plants over the trellis as opposed to on the ground, there'll be better airflow of the foliage and therefore less fungal diseases. As the fruit grow, I'll support them with old stockings to stop them snapping off under their own weight. There's plenty of gap space between the mesh and between the panels to make picking fruit nice and easy. The timing of sowing is important. The soil needs to be warm, above 20 degrees for the seeds to germinate. I'm planting 3 seeds at the base of each panel and will then thin out to the strongest plant once they've germinated. For this setup, that means 4 planting locations, 2 on each side and each about 1 metre apart. Once the plants are up and underway, it's best to water them using drip irrigation. This will keep the leaves dry and further reduce the likelihood of fungal diseases. When it comes to fertilising, a liquid feed every 2 to 3 weeks will keep the plants really pumping away. Waiting for a crop of watermelons normally involves playing the long game, but the heirloom varieties that I've just planted will be mature much quicker. The golden midgets will be ready in just 14 weeks, and the sugar babies are lightning fast 10 weeks. I can't wait to taste them. I mean, I literally can't wait to taste them. Thankfully, I've got this to tide me over. Here's to trying something new in the garden. Cheers.
What was the last plant that you acquired for your garden? Millie, what do you got?
Oh gosh, I actually don't know. Now I need to think about it. Look, I got some seed from a friend. Beautiful little winged paper daisy from New South Wales, and I've raised that seed now. And I love growing seed gifted from people because it's such a joy to grow a new seed that you haven't grown before, watch it germinate and what happens. It's not only a new garden plant for me, but it's also a seed from someone else's garden. And, you know, over time I'll share that with other people.
I love getting things from other people's gardens, and my last collection was actually a trade with a gardener who had lovely lemongrass and I needed to grow more. So in return, I sent a load of unusual species and some rare heritage vegetable seed in return. So it was a trade.
That's gorgeous.
How about you?
Well, my beautiful dad actually gifted me some really nice pots of lemon verbena and a white sage from my dad. And you know, I've got both of those in my garden already, but the more the merrier. It's such a gorgeous thing to receive plants from loved ones, and I can always find room for them.
Well, it's the provenance that counts, isn't it?
And your dad was a herb grower, yeah? You grew up on a herb farm.
Yeah, so herbs run deep in our blood, and so, yeah, we really can never have enough.
Our
Our next story follows the path of a long-time friend of the show. Over the years, he shared his passion for plant science, unlocking the secrets of those unique West Australian plants. But this time, he's letting us into his own private garden. Enjoy this special piece of personal paradise.
As a kid, a garden like this was my dream. It's got water, it's got a brook, it has beautiful greenery, it has good soils for native species and for many exotic species. So this was really a garden waiting quite late in my gardening career, but no finer way to actually round off a botany and gardening life than to have a place like this. The garden is a constant source of challenges, but I guess for gardeners, that's what gets us out of bed every day and keeps you inspired. I'm Kingsley Dixon, I'm a botanist, and I'm also a passionate gardener. This place is just an hour south of Perth. It's in the Darling Range. It's a really unusual place because it has weather, I guess, pretty much like Tasmania. The garden itself sits at the bottom of a deep valley, and that provides us with this unique microclimate. The hills rise to about 330 metres on all sides of us, so it's deep. It's often dark. So the tree ferns are really unusual. We've got a very large number of them, in the many thousands. The deep valley, the rich soils, and the permanent water have really created for them the perfect location that you would find in any parts of Victoria. Because we're embedded in the Lane Pool Nature Reserve, and because of the steepness, we have a continuous forest all the way through to the forest in that nature reserve. The 12 acres of garden that we have here is a lot of work, but you know, it's the cheapest gym membership in the world. So my husband Lionel has been along for the entire journey. We were married in this very garden. The whole thing is done as a perfect partnership between the pair of us. It couldn't have happened any other way. It was having a botanically inclined family that I think led me into really appreciating plants and wildlife, but it was always the plants. And by the time I was 8 years old, I had my own little shade house with my own little collection of plants. When I was 12 years old, the summer holidays had started, and there was this sign for a nursery, and it said Native Plant Nursery. And I had found my mentors for the next stage of my life, which was really learning about native plants and the complexity. During my whole university career, and I spent those 3 years in my undergraduate course revelling in really starting to understand how plants grow and operate, and then went on to a PhD with a wonderful Professor John Pate, and together we stayed in research for about 30 years, including the time when I got my dream job, which of course was my position at Kings Park. When that position came up for a display botanist and I managed to get it, I really thought this was my toe in to actually becoming a botanist doing research in a botanic garden. We were the first people to develop sophisticated tissue culture and the first people to do the cryo storage. That's the liquid nitrogen freezing of threatened species. It was a great interest of mine. It took us many years to finally crack it. We were running a restoration research lab and there were about a third of native species we couldn't germinate, but they came up after a fire. And we started some research following on from a lead from some South African colleagues. And in 1995, we published the paper showing that, in fact, smoke, not heat and ash, was the major stimulator which makes the Western Australian and most Australian bushland areas burst into growth and blooming. Following that, with some amazing PhD students, I said, let's find the chemical. I'm sure we can do that. That was 11 years of hard slog until in 2004 we finally cracked it and made the world announcement. A new molecule to science. We called it carrick quinolide. Carrick from smoke, the Noongar word for smoke, and olide refers to the chemical nature of the molecule that we discovered. And it's on the backbone of that that we developed one of the largest restoration research groups in Australia, which today we carry on with my new position at Curtin University, which I joined in 2015, which is leading Australia in the science of rebuilding damaged landscapes. One of the great joys in my life is being able to merge that professional interest with, of course, my gardening interests. We experimented in the first year with seeing where the natives would grow because it was wet, quite dark, with quite rich soils for native species. But the advantage of the site that we've now put the native gardens through is one that was all cleared. So we're left with this bare soil, but it was north facing and it's free draining. So I thought this is the magic, because with natives, as long as they can get down to deep water, they don't want to be waterlogged and they want warmth and sunshine, we could probably win. So it's essentially a native garden for all seasons and all places. So one of the great joys is this garden I've been able to grow one of Western Australia's rarest plants. It's this little aquatic plant. This is in its dormant phase, and soon, as the weather warms up, it'll start developing these big leaves, which are essentially Venus flytraps that trap small, unsuspecting animals in the water, and that's the way they get their nitrogen and their phosphorus. So it's the water wheel plant, Eldravanda, and it's a species that's become very rare because it depends upon high water quality. But we've got abundant water here, so I'm able to grow this very successfully. We like to think that the garden has elements of the Impressionist garden. It picks up elements of Monet, and we were so thrilled to finally build our mini version of a Monet bridge across one of the streams. But of course, Monet had a great fascination with things Japanese. And so we've carried the theme of the Japanese ethic in some of the parts of the garden in terms of the simplicity of plantings, but it's very much done through a European gardening and Australian gardening style. But along the way, we've been able to do things to really create that true Japanese feel. And the building of the tea house has been a long-term vision of ours, and we're really thrilled now that it's finally done and we can finally have cups of tea in a proper tea house. Gardening is one of those basic human instincts that connects you with nature. As my Noongar colleagues say, it connects you to the land and to the spirit of the country. And gardening in a place like this is one of the most uplifting things I've ever done in my life, and it's one of the things we look forward to each weekend. God, we're sick of picking up sticks, raking leaves, fallen trees, pulling the weeds, but at the end of each day, we'll have a little drink somewhere in a special part of the garden, and always we get reminded that it's all been worthwhile and that the garden is giving back much more than we've put into it.
There's nothing like that sense of satisfaction from getting some of those big garden jobs under your belt. Well, there's plenty to choose from this week's Jobs for the Weekend. Time to get your boots on. In cool areas, start radicchio in seed trays for a long-lasting lunch crop. The summer leaves will protect crisp cabbage-like heads which form in autumn. Sow coriander now to encourage plants to set seed. When the seeds mature, they'll be ready to sow again, and you can save some spice for the pantry. Soak beetroot seeds overnight with a teaspoon of boron powder. Then sow 2 centimetres deep at 5 centimetre spacing. Thin out seedlings as they emerge to give them space. In warm areas, remove all dry, dead material out of trees and gutters and collect fallen branches. Pile it up away from the house and wet down to make compost. Trim off dead leaves and spent rose flowers. Make your cut a few growing points down to encourage airflow and a new flush of blooms. Harvest blueberries and give them a light prune. Fruit is born on 1-year-old wood, so remove older central branches as their production wanes. In subtropical areas, climbing beans can be pinched at the tips now. This will push their energy into flowers and pod production instead of height. Lemongrass tastes great and grows tall really quickly, so keep contained in a pot. They love full sun and will shield young seedlings from scorching heat. Bindi's gone bananas? Dilute 2 tablespoons of iron sulfate in a 9-litre can and only apply to plants you want gone. Take care not to splash it around as it can cause black stains. In tropical areas, make up a mix of organic copper fungicide to prevent losing your crops. Always follow the label for dosage and repeat again in 2 weeks. Mature pepper vines are flourishing now. Harvest to dry or use whole stems in a range of Southeast Asian dishes. Their fragrant flavour will delight you. Fish mint is a herb that thrives in hot, wet weather. Give it a fortnightly liquid feed with seaweed or fish emulsion and enjoy it in summer stir-fries. In arid areas, set your sights on Dusty Miller silver lace, with its yellow flowers appearing now. Shade them from hot arvo sun and tip prune after flowering. Stone fruits are in season, so keep on top of your bumper crop by preserving your harvest. Be sure to pick up any fallen fruit to avoid a fruit fly infestation. If you love buttery Brussels sprouts, it's time to get planting. Plant deeply into compost-enriched soil and apply a seaweed solution to help them settle in. Yum! There's so much to do in summer, so just get into it. For even more ideas, head over to the how-to guides on our YouTube channel. Well, that's it for the show. But there's even more coming up next week in our Christmas special. Here's what we're bringing to the party. Be there with bells on.
I'm revisiting a very special garden that not only brings joy to its owner, but also to others.
How good is early summer? The anticipation of all of those flavours to come. It's also a great time to get some work done, and I'm going to show you how.
And if you're keen to get crafty this Christmas, I've got the perfect project for you to try. Beautiful wreaths and hanging decorations. They're fun, easy to make, and best of all, feature living plants.